Good morning and welcome to our webinar. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes before we start, and then I'll do the introductions. Thanks for joining. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Thank you for taking the time to join. My name is Roy Whittet. I'm based in Melbourne, and I'd like to just do a quick introduction to the team. A couple of new faces. Many of you know Eddie Stefano, who's based in Melbourne with me. David Urbano, Regional Technical Manager, Enterprise Focus, joined our team 7 months ago. David's based up in Sydney. And then 3 weeks ago, Peter Davison joined our team, and really pleased to have him on board. Peter's a regional sales manager based up in Sydney, brings with him a wealth of experience and was previously with Xeris and Aerohive and Riverbed. It's great to have Pete on board. Joining us to present today on the panel, we have John Mead, who's a Senior Director of Engineering, our mastermind behind our cnMatrix switching portfolio. Today we're focusing on a key feature that makes them a little bit different, and that's the policy-based automation feature on those, and pleased to have John Seligson, who's the solution and software architect behind the features and has coded that all up. And then also with us, solution architect Tam Yun, who's based over in the West Coast. So great to have the cnMatrix team on board. And John, thanks for taking it away.
Thank you very much, Roy. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for your time today. We're going to spend about an hour, a little bit over an hour, talking about our cnMatrix switches. Today's presentation is a little bit different. I'm going to spend 99% of the time talking about the one feature PBA that really does differentiate us from our competitors. You know, I started with Cambium about exactly 4 years ago. We've been shipping products for a little over 2.5 years now. And, you know, entering a mature market like Ethernet switching, it's hard to set yourself apart. It's hard to differentiate yourself. But PBA really has made a difference for us. Our customers are noticing, and many customers have, you know, started to select only the cnMatrix switches, and analysts have started to notice as well. But anyway, today's all about PBA, and you will learn quite a bit today, I hope, and we'll have some Q&A towards the end. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of the portfolio, and then I'm going to jump right into PBA. I'm going to talk about how it works, what it is, go through a few examples, and then that should take about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll jump right into the demo, which will take another half an hour or so. Okay, so here we go. So one point I would like to make is that, you know, we're not about selling just point products. So I'm here to talk about switches, yes, the point product switches, but it's really about the solution that we have. You know, for our wireless connectivity in the enterprise space, we have our Wi-Fi APs. You know, in our fixed wireless broadband space, we have all of our various Cambium radios. And then for the wired side, for both of those both the enterprise space and the WISP tower space, you know, we have our cnMatrix switches. And then to kind of cap it all off is our cloud management software. So those three components, wired, wireless, and the cloud management, those three components work together really well to give you a really comprehensive solution. And of course, I'm going to say this because I work at Cambium, but if you look at this solution, it really does compete and compare very, very well with our competitors. But anyway, I am focusing on the switches today, and from the switches point of view, I'm going to be focusing on policy-based automation. So our switches, you can kind of divide them up into two different families. We have our enterprise switches and our WISP tower switches. So these are two different families of switches that are purpose-built for these deployment use cases. We couldn't do everything with just one switch or one switch family. There are differences between the WISP tower switches and the enterprise switches. So real quick, operational efficiency is a big driver of ours, right? Not the specific features like VLAN and so on and so forth. We have all that, but ease of use is a big initiative of ours, and we did spend time and energy on this. And PBA is one aspect of that. Highly secure, lots of security features in our box, and PBA helps out with that too. The cloud management, I've already talked about that, a big component of what we're offering. And the switches themselves, these are enterprise grade, layer 2, layer 3 non-blocking switches. These are not your retail switches. They are enterprise grade switches, fully managed. And I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on this, but this is just a quick overview. Best in class total cost of ownership. The features that I talked about today, PBA as an example, the support that comes with your purchase, the Cambium support that you get, and our limited lifetime warranty that you get, all of that comes with the base price of the switch. The cloud management that I'm talking about, that also comes with the base cost of the switch. We have cnMatrix Essentials, which gives you everything that I'm going to talk about today, and it is free with the base price of the switch. When you consider all of that, it really does put us in a best of class total cost of ownership area. So that's a quick overview of our portfolio. These are our cnMatrix switches, been shipping for about a little over 2.5 years. The new WISP tower switches just started shipping earlier this year. So policy-based automation, let's jump right into it. So zero touch. Let me start out by defining zero touch. So if you ask 10 people what zero touch means to them, I would get 10 different answers. So here's my answer as to what zero touch is. So zero touch means whenever you need to do some configuration on your switch, how do you automate that configuration so that it truly is zero touch? So the one aspect of this is the configuration of the switch that you do when you initially deploy your switch. So some people pre-stage their switch. They configure some basic aspects. Here's a few examples. Static VLANs, which ports are going to be the uplink ports or port channel with link aggregation. The IP address, are you going to statically define it or DHCP? So these are some examples of what you might want to configure your switch with initially before you deploy it. So how do you avoid that configuration? How do you automate all that configuration? So we do that today with our cloud management platform. When you onboard and register your switch, the switch will contact cnMatrix out in the cloud, and one of the things it does is to download the configuration file. So all that initial configuration can be automated on the switch. And that's what zero touch means to most people. How do you automate that? But that is only half of the story. The second half of the story, for me anyway, is what about the configuration that is required for ongoing network changes? So you've deployed your switch, but now you have to connect devices into your switch. So what kind of devices are we talking about here? Anything, right? Access points, cameras, printers. If you start talking about IoT devices, now you're talking about thousands of things. The thermostat that's in your office, or the controller for the blinds, or the lighting system. But any of these devices that you connect to your switch will require some type of configuration on your switch. A popular example is VLANs, right? For your video surveillance cameras, what VLAN do you want your video traffic to go on? Or, what do you want your QoS settings configured to, or your security settings? So you plug in this device, you need to apply configuration to your switch. So how do you automate that configuration? It seems pretty tricky, right? The solution for us is policy-based automation. So with policy-based automation, your day-to-day network changes and the associated configuration on your switches can be automated. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into policy-based automation. So first off, secure. So policy-based automation does make your network more secure. So what PBA does is, in the background, our switch is gathering as much information as we can about each device that you connect. And based on that device profile, we can determine if it matches one of our policies, so PBA policies. If it does match that policy, we will automatically enforce that policy and automatically configure the switch accordingly. And I'll go through this later, but that configuration can be switch-related configuration, or it can be configuration related to that specific port. But when you plug in the device, all of this stuff happens automatically. So from a security point of view, you automatically put the devices on the right segment or on the right VLAN. You don't accidentally put the wrong device on some, mission critical, very sensitive VLAN, your finance network or something like that. Now, auto configuration cleanup, what do I mean by that? So when you connect a device, it's really cool to say we automate all the configuration. But what happens when you remove that device? It's equally important or more important to clean up that configuration. So if you open up a port to some VLANs, and when you disconnect that device, you want to clean up those VLANs. You don't want those VLANs to be open on that port. So when you disconnect that device with PBA, we will automatically clean up that configuration. So that's the security side of PBA. Simplicity, that's the main driver for PBA. I talked about this already in my previous slide, but zero touch for initial deployment and zero touch for adds, moves, and changes of the devices that you're going to be connecting to the switch. So all you do is physically plug in the device and you walk away. There's no need to log into the switch and do detailed configuration for that one device you just added. Another aspect that you get out of PBA is that all ports are created equal. So when you're going to plug a video surveillance camera into your switch, you can plug it into port 1 or port 5 or port 10 or port 15. You can plug it into any port you want. People used to try to create zero touch by hard coding their ports. So ports 1 through 4 are hard coded for Wi-Fi access ports. And ports 5 through 8 might be hard coded for video surveillance cameras, and so on and so forth. So the installers would have to know, okay, I'm installing an access point, I'm going to plug it into port 1. There's no need for that anymore. With PBA, you plug that device into any port, and we will detect what that device is, and we will apply the appropriate configuration to that port. So all ports are created equal. So TCO, or total cost of ownership. So some big wins here. Elimination of error-prone and time-consuming manual configuration. That's a big win. There's a stat that people talk about. 80% of network outages are due to some type of misconfiguration, which is usually a human error of some type. So it's, as much as you can automate, the better. Reduces the chance of human error. Now this 80% number, I don't know if I believe that it's that high, but anyway, it is high, right? So eliminating that error-prone manual configuration is a big win. Now, because of PBA, you no longer have to log into the switch and know how to configure the switch. So little or maybe no IT is required for these adds, moves, and changes. Now, I'm not trying to say you don't need an IT team or you don't need IT services, but the IT team is always overloaded. This is one thing that we do not have to worry about. So overall, based on everything I've said, it reduces time, energy, and costs required to maintain and manage your network. Okay, so going a little bit into the details here. So how does PBA work? So first of all, policies are created to match types of devices. And I've been giving you examples: access points, video surveillance cameras, printers, you name it, any type you want. So for this type of device, you will create a policy. Now, access points, let's say you have two styles of access points and you want to treat them differently. You can do that too. You can create two policies, one for one type of access point, one for the other type of access point. Very, very flexible. So, but one policy will cover the same device type regardless how many you have of them. So one policy for access points, you can plug in one access point, or you can plug in hundreds of access points into your network. It doesn't matter. You only need one policy for that. Policies can be created via any management interface. So I told you these switches are fully managed. You know, we support CLI, we support a user-friendly web GUI. All of our features are instrumented with an SMP MIB, or you can use our cloud management, network management system, cnMatrix. We recommend using cnMatrix for the configuration of PBA policies, simply because when you create it with cnMatrix, it will push that policy down to every switch in your network. If you create it with a local CLI, it only creates the policy on that one switch. But anyway, with cnMatrix, you create this one policy, it will push it down to all the switches in your switch group, and that's a big advantage. So these policies will have two components, kind of touched on it a little bit, but the device type criteria. So the first component is, how do you know that what you plugged in is the device type you're looking for? And we have two mechanisms that we support today, and we're building on top of that. But you know, the first mechanism is MAC addresses, right? So we can match a MAC address to know what the device is. But matching the exact MAC address is a little bit limited. So we can match ranges of MAC addresses. We can match MAC OUIs, which I'm going to demonstrate later today. The second component of PBA is the actions that you want to take for that device type. So the actions that we support, a pretty long list here. So VLANs is the most popular, right? You plug in a video surveillance camera, you want your video surveillance traffic to be on VLAN 85. So anyway, you can automatically create VLAN 85 on your switch, and the port where the video surveillance camera was detected, that port will also be made a member of VLAN 85. So anyway, VLAN is an example of an action you can take. QoS settings, the user priority bits, the 802.1p bits, the switch port mode, right? Hybrid or access or trunk. PoE priority is a good one, right? The default value is low. For some of your important devices, maybe your video surveillance traffic, you want the PoE priority on that port to be critical or high. So whenever you detect a video surveillance camera, PBA will automatically set the PoE priority to high for you. Port labeling is kind of a small, silly thing, but it's one of my favorite ones. You know, every switch from every vendor supports the ability for you to label a port. You know, you plug a printer into port 5, and you can go in there with the CLI or web GUI or whatever that vendor supports, and you can manually enter printer for port 5. Well, with PBA, it will do that automatically for you. You don't have to manually enter that name. And that's, you know, if you move that device from port 5 to port 10, you have to remember to remove it from port 5 and then manually add it again to port 10. With PBA, you don't have to do that. It automatically cleans it up on the old port and automatically applies that label to the new port. And I'll show you that in my demo later today. So we have a feature called Protected Port, very cool. You can automatically add ports to that. Cambium Sync is something that we have for our WISP tower deployments that can automatically be enabled as a result of PBA. The port speed, automatic device recovery is a new feature that we added earlier this year. Roy, I think it's one of your customers actually that requested this, but we will kind of monitor the health of connected devices to the switch. And if this feature is enabled, we can, if the health is determined to be bad, or if it can no longer talk to that device, we will automatically toggle the PoE to that device. So to kind of give it a wake-up call. And it's a lot better than having to drive out to the site and physically power cycle that device. So you can do it, the software can do it automatically. A pretty nice feature. But anyway, so do you want ADR to be enabled on that port? Well, you can do it automatically with your PBA actions. Okay, so all of this configuration that I've talked about, that is a result of PBA, we consider that configuration dynamic. So that's how we auto clean up that configuration. If the device goes away, if someone pulls out the cable, or if that device starts advertising different criteria, we will automatically clean up the configuration on that port that is associated with that PBA policy. Okay, let me summarize everything that I've said today. So what do you get with PBA? It automates the adds, moves, and changes of the network devices that you connect to the switch. Number two, and this one's equally important, eliminates error-prone and time-consuming manual configuration. And there's so many examples I could give you. It really does simplify and reduce the troubleshooting out there. Every port is treated equally. It enhances security by, auto-profiling and auto-segmenting the devices that are connected to your network. And overall, it just really simplifies life. It reduces the time and the expenses required to deploy and manage your network. So I have a couple slides here with kind of just typical questions and answers, and I probably won't go through this, but Roy can distribute this deck and you guys can take a look at it. But I'll go through a few of them. But how many policies can be created? The current limit is 100. I don't know of anyone using more than 10. But anyway, we can increase that limit. There's nothing that's really stopping us from supporting more. How many different devices can a single policy be applied to? So if you create a policy for a Wi-Fi access point, it's unlimited. You can have as many access points as you want to plug in. That policy is pushed down to however many switches you have in your network. You might have one switch in your network, or you might have 100 switches in your network. But anyway, there's no limit. Can more than one policy be applied to a device? No. When you create a policy, and I'll show you this later, when you create a policy, you can also set a precedence value. So if you want one policy to have a higher precedence than another, you can do that with this precedence settings. Okay, I'm going to start going through these pretty quickly, skipping through these, but please take a look later when you scroll through this deck. A pretty interesting Q&A that we get from time to time. Lots of questions here. Okay, this is good. So PBA examples. The demo that I'm going to give you today, I have one or two devices that I'm going to plug in, and I'm going to show you how the configuration goes from no configuration at all to all of a sudden lots of configuration. And I'm going to demo that for you for one or two devices. But in the real world, you're not talking about one or two devices. So this example that I have here, let's say you have a network with 20 switches, and you want to deploy 200 video surveillance cameras, and let's say you want to deploy another 100 Wi-Fi access points. To do that with PBA, it's very easy. You create two policies. You're going to create one policy for the Wi-Fi access points and one policy for the cameras, and you're finished. Now, in my demo today, I'm also going to create two policies, right? Now, I only have one camera and one access point to plug in, but you still only need two policies, even if it's 200 cameras and 100 access points. So two policies is all that's needed here. And once you create them, you're done. There's no more configuration you have to do. You're ready to deploy those 300 devices. So you connect in the cameras, you connect in the access points, and they are all auto-detected by the PBA engine. And then the switches and the ports that those devices were connected to are all automatically configured. So 100% zero touch, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you today. Okay, a few more examples. Here's another example. It's the exact same one I just showed you. However, This is more for WISP or tower deployment. So let's say you're deploying 10 towers. And in each tower, you have 8 radios per tower. And let's say, this is all random, I made this up, but let's say you have 4 point-to-point radios and 4 PMP radios in each tower. You know, so to use PBA here, you need to create 2 policies, one for the PTP radios and one for the PMP radios, and you're done. Now, when you're installing these devices, right, you connect the cable from your switch up the tower, up to the top of the tower, and you're plugging in the device. You don't really have to worry about what port you plug that radio into. Plug it into any port of the switch, and this PBA policy will take over and do what's necessary. Now, I do need to clarify on these WISP switches, different, you know, half of our ports support 24-volt passive. So if that's the type of radio you have, you do have to you do have to plug it into the right port from that point of view. Okay, and then same thing as my previous example. Once you create these 2 policies, you're finished. You just physically plug in the devices and everything is automatically configured. Very, very easy. Here's an example that people are very interested in. So you have a switch, you're going to be connecting in lots of devices. You don't really know all the different devices that people might be plugging into that switch. Maybe it's a secure location inside of a wiring closet, maybe it's not. But you want to set it up so that unknown devices are configured properly, and then the known devices that you care about are also configured properly. So the way you can do that is you create a base policy or a default policy. This default policy, it will match every device known to mankind. So, for example, the matching criteria could be the MAC address range from 0 to FFFF. So every device will match it. And for that policy, you set the QoS to a very low value. You set the VLAN to some guest VLAN. And then you set the precedence, this is important, you set the precedence of this policy to be low. So this policy right here will catch every device that's plugged into your switch. However, for the devices that you do care about, the devices that are known, like video surveillance cameras, you want to create a new policy for those. And in that policy, you know, you put that video surveillance traffic on the correct VLAN. You give it the higher QoS settings. And you set the precedence to a higher value so that on that port where you plug in a video surveillance cameras, you know, both of these policies will match it. But because of the higher precedence value, this one will take control. So what you're left with is that all unknown devices will be put into the guest VLAN and have a very low QoS setting. And all known devices, your desired devices, will be given the correct configuration. So this is an example of what people really like to do and 100% secure. And this is the exact same slide. I duplicated it. I apologize. And here we go. So this example, it's a little bit amusing, but it's real. This really does happen. So imagine you're walking through the wiring closet and you accidentally unplug one of the connections. Or let's say you're a cashier at a cash register and you reach under the counter on a shelf, you're looking for something, and you accidentally unplug the cable from the switch. So this accidental disconnection happens all the time. So what you do is you pick up the cable that you unplugged and you look over your shoulder, you make sure no one's watching, you plug it back into the switch. And you see the lights come up, you think everything's okay. Now, if that device that you accidentally unplugged is a Wi-Fi access point, that Wi-Fi access point, when you plug it into another port, the Wi-Fi access point will power up because of PoE. You know, assuming you have PoE on by default on all your ports, it will power up and it will advertise its SSIDs and devices will connect to it. But because the port is not configured correctly, you plugged it into the wrong port. It's not a member of the right VLANs. So the SSIDs need to be bound to the correct VLANs. And in that example, people can connect to the network, but they can't get anywhere. And that's when you start getting a bunch of phone calls. So it results in a loss of connectivity if you don't have PBA. But with PBA, what happens is when you unplug that device, PBA will automatically clean up the configuration on that port. So that's step one. Step two is when you plug it into another port. Remember, we said all ports are equal. So it will automatically detect that access point in that new port. It will automatically apply the correct configuration, which includes the VLANs and so on. And you're good to go. So highly secure with the auto cleanup. Okay, we're on to the demo part of this of today. And let me plug in my switches. 1 second. Okay, so let me explain what I'm going to demonstrate to you. So 3 simple steps. The first step is to create the configuration that you want applied to your group of switches. So we call them either groups of switches, or we also call it a virtual stack. But anyway, you create that configuration first. You log into your account on cnMaestro, and you create this configuration. Now, there's 2 things you can do. When you're adding new switches to your network, if you add them to an existing stack, you don't have to create new configuration. The switch will just take on the configuration of that stack. I'm going to demo that today. Or you can create a new stack. So you create this new stack, you create the configuration of that new stack, and then you add switches to that. Now, this configuration is going to consist of whatever configuration you want on that switch from an initial deployment point of view. So as soon as you plug the switch into the network, this static configuration will be downloaded to the switch. Now, that configuration, static configuration, can also consist of some PBA policies. So you'll have PBA policies located on your switch as well. Okay, step 2. So step 2 is to claim the switches. Now, step 1, you don't have to have physical possession of your switches. You just go to your cnMaestro account and you create your configuration. Step 2 is to claim the switches on cnMaestro. Now, you also don't have to be in physical possession of your switches for step 2 either, but you do need to know the serial numbers of your switches for step 2. So for step 2, you go into cnMaestro, you claim your switches with the serial number, and during the claiming process, you can say, when this switch onboards, I want it to assign it to an existing stack, either the one that you newly created in step 1 or to an existing stack that was already there. So step 2 is to claim your switches. Step 3 is to connect your switch to the network. So step 1 and step 2, you could have done, months before you actually received the physical switch. You only needed the serial number for step 2. But when you're ready to plug in your physical switch, number 3, you power it up, you plug it into the network, and then you're finished. There's nothing else to do. When you plug it into your network, it will automatically go out, search and find cnMaestro. It will onboard and register with cnMaestro. It will get its configuration file. That configuration file will contain some PBA policies. So now these switches already have PBA policies on them, and now you're ready to deploy devices. And so after you deploy your switches, you're ready for your day-to-day operations, and you can plug in devices into your network. And that's it. So the live demo that I'm going to show you today is going to include the following. I have 2 switches here. These 2 switches, before today's call, I factory defaulted them. So it's as if we just bought them new from the factory. And the demo is going to have 2 parts. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new stack. So I'm going to go through the process of creating a configuration for the stack. I'm going to create some VLANs. I'm also going to show you how to create PBA policies. It doesn't take 20 minutes to create a policy. It will take us 1 or 2 minutes to create this policy. Now I'm going to plug in 1 camera and 1 access point as a demo. So I'm going to create 2 policies, 1 for each. the second part of today's demo is I'm going to add a second switch to this existing stack that I just created. So the first switch I add will be adding the very first switch to this new stack. The second switch I add will be adding a switch to an already existing stack. So that requires zero configuration. It just absorbs the configuration of the existing stack. Now, as I go through this demo, as I add these switches, I'm going to demonstrate to you adds and moves and changes of this access point that I have and of the video surveillance camera. And I'm going to demonstrate to you the auto configuration, and I'm going to demonstrate to you the auto cleanup of the configuration. So let's go do this. So let's go to the demo, and hopefully you guys can see my screen. Here we go. So I'm going to assume that you guys can see my screen here. This is my cnMaestro account. I have already logged in, and some of you are familiar with cnMaestro, maybe not everyone, but on the left-hand panel here is how I navigate through my cnMaestro. So I click on this home screen here. If you guys can see my cursor, I'm going to scroll over to the right, and on the right-hand side here, there's something for onboarding devices. Okay, so that's what we're going to do to add the switches to our network. But first, let me show you some of the stuff that we have over here. So about 4 items down, there's this one item called switch groups. So let me show you what I have in my account. So I have 4 switch groups already. For example, the first one is JM, that's me, John Mead, and this is my home network. So I have a network at home. It's not very complex, it's one switch. And then I have a network in my office, and you can see it has 4 switches, and 0 of them are offline. It's a good thing. My home network is 1 switch, 0 of them are offline. It tells you, just rough highlights. So on my home network, 3 of 10 ports are active. On my network at the office, 8 of 58 ports are active, and I have some VLANs created, blah, blah, blah. So these are my existing stacks. I'm going to create a brand new stack, new. Okay, so now I'm going to make a name for it. We can call it anything you want. How about demo stack? Okay, I'm going to click the auto sync button, and description is demo for demo. Okay, and then I'm going to push save, and it's going to give us an error. So the very first time you create a virtual stack, you see that pop-up error window. You need to reset your password. So we didn't used to require this. We used to let the default passwords go, but now we require you to change the passwords to a more secure password. So I'm going to do that now. And I do that in this management tab here. And I have to do this twice. So let's see, I'm going to just kind of speed things up. So I'm going to do it for the root. Here's the root password, confirm it, and update it. And then I'm going to do it for the guest. You can have multiple users. You can have more than 2, but what comes is the admin gives you root privileges and the guest. So for the guest, enter the password, confirm the password, and update that. Now I'm going to save that, and we're finished. Okay, so we set up the basic stuff, which is the name, demo stack. We changed our password. Now I'm going to go to the network settings, and let's go ahead and configure our new stack. So for VLANs, let's just statically create some VLANs for the heck of it. I'm going to create VLANs 555, 666, and 777. So just kind of randomly selecting 3 VLANs. Our switches do support 4K VLANs simultaneously. So add that. Now, what else do I want to do? Well, let's create our PBA policies. So this is where it gets a little fun. So here, kind of in the second half, the bottom half of the screen is where you set up policy-based automation. So there's 3 tabs here. If you can see my cursor, policies, rules, and actions. A policy is just linking a rule to an action. So let's set up a couple rules first. So I'm going to click on the rules tab. I'm going to have my cursor, I'm going to select add new right down here. And first you name the rule, and I'm going to name it as a camera. So for the camera that I'm going to have a rule called camera. And what type of rule is this going to be? Well, these are all the different types of rules we support. We support link layer discovery protocol, and I forgot to talk about this earlier. So LLDP is a protocol that's exchanged between the switch and the device, and it's a packet, and it's an Ethernet packet that's made up of a bunch of little data snippets. And we look at the LLDP packet, we look at all those data snippets. For example, the chassis, the snippets are called TLV. So we look at the chassis TLV, IPv port management TLV, the LLDP port TLV. We look at all these TLVs, and we can use any of that information to set the criteria for detecting this device. But for this camera rule, I'm going to go down and use a MAC address rule type, and I'm going to look for a MAC OUI. So that means that any camera from this one vendor that has that MAC OUI will match this rule type. And the device data is the actual OUI. So, automatic entry here. So this is the MAC OUI. So I'm going to add that rule, and you can see it now. Camera rule, MAC OUI, and you can see the various rule information. So I have one rule called camera rule. Let's create a second one. The second one, I'm going to call it the pilot rule, which is for my Wi-Fi access points. I'm calling it pilot rule because these are called CN pilot access points. Anyway, and I'm going to use the LLDP any type. That means I'm going to look at all these different LLDP things, and I'm going to look for what? What am I going to look for? I'm just going to look for a string called pilot. So in the, I forget if it's the system name or the system description, RAPs put in the word, they use the word pilot. So just to simplify this, I'm just going to search for the word pilot. Okay, so now I have two rules, one for the camera, one for the access point. Now I'm going to create actions. So I go up to the action tab here, click on action. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select add new. And first I name the action. So I'm going to name this as camera action. The VLANs, what VLANs do I want to create? I'm just going to randomly select. So 600 through 602 is what I've been using for this demo. The default user priority, the default value is 0. I'm going to set this to 2. The QoS trusted mode, I'll set this to .1p. The PoE priority, I'm going to set this to, the default is low. I'm going to set it to critical. And protected port, won't configure that for this demo. And I'm going to add that action. So now down here, you see we have one action, and these are all the settings we did. I'm going to add another action, name it. This is for the pilot, for the Wi-Fi access point. So the pilot action. The VLANs, I'm going to just, let's say the SSIDs that these Wi-Fi access points are bound to the VLANs 222, 223, 224, and 225. The default user priority, I put the camera at 2, so I'll put these at 3. The QoS trust mode, I'll put this at .1p also. The PoE priority, I'll set it to high. I think the camera I set to critical. And the protected port, won't use that. Add it. So now I have two actions. So now let's create the actual policy. So the policies is just linking a rule to an action. So to add a new policy, I name the policy, and I'm going to call it camera policy. So this is the policy that's going to detect and configure the switch when a camera is detected. So I'm naming it camera policy. The rule is going to be the camera rule that I previously defined. The action is going to be the camera action that I previously defined. And the precedence value that I talked to you before, the default value is 50. And you can enter a value of 1 through 100. I don't need to worry about the precedence for today's demo, so I'm going to add that. So now I have one policy for the cameras. I'm going to do the same thing for the Wi-Fi access points, add new, pilot policy. Action is this is the pilot, oops, skip the rule. So the rule is going to be the pilot rule. The action is going to be the pilot action, add it. So now I've created 2 policies. So it wasn't too hard to do. It's pretty easy. Now these 2 policies, I have 1 camera and I have 1 access point, but these 2 policies are good for, let's say you had 200 cameras and 200 access points. So anyway, we're good to go. Now let's remember to save. If we don't save it, it would warn us, but I'm going to save this configuration that I just did. And as a reminder, what did we do? We created some static VLANs, so the switch will automatically have VLANs 555, 666, and 777. This doesn't have anything to do with port membership, but these VLANs now exist on the switch. And we've created 2 policies. So we're done with our configuration, and we're ready to start the actual demo. So I'm going to go to my home screen. Oh, well, let's go. So let's go back to switch groups. So these are all my switch groups. And now I have a new one that I just created, demo stack. And you can see I have 0 switches that have been assigned to that stack, okay? 0 switches. So let's add one of the switches that I have, and we'll onboard 1 switch. So I'm going to go to the onboard screen. And first I claim the device, and okay, so I enter the SSID. I'm sorry, I enter the MAC address of this guy, the serial number, and I claim the device, and it was a success. And now I have 1 device that cnMaestro is waiting for it, okay? But it's not going to do anything until I approve it. Now, before I approve it, I'm going to assign this switch to one of my switch groups, or to one of my switch stacks. So I go to the edit button here, this little pencil, and I'm going to say switch group. I'm going to assign it to the demo stack that I just created. Select demo stack, the model, the switch that I have here. These are EX2010Ps that I have, and I'm going to save it. Okay, so we're good to go. I'm going to now approve this, and once I approve it, the onboarding and registration process will happen. So this isn't instantaneous, right? Now the switch is connected to the network. I had already connected it to the network, so it already did the DNS lookup. It's already established connectivity to cnMaestro. So anyway, it's going through the onboarding process. It just completed. Let's go back to the switch groups screen and see this demo stack. Now I have 1 switch, exciting. So, and that switch is online. So let's click on that. And it's a very exciting stack that we have here. We have a total of 1 switch. That 1 switch has 10 ports. And I have 1 port that's active because it's connected to my network, and that's how it established connectivity with cnMaestro. Out of sync, it's not out of sync. So there's 0 switches that are out of sync, meaning the configuration was pushed successfully. Let's look at that switch. So up top here, there's some tabs. There's 1 tab called switches. I'm going to connect to that. And then I'm going to so here's all the switches. There's only 1, and it tells you something online. It's been online for about a minute. We onboarded it about a minute ago. Serial number, IP address, software version, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to click on this, and this is the switch dashboard. Lots of pretty cool information. There's not very much data because it's only been online for a minute now. And here's port 8 that is active. That's the one that's connected to my network. And I am now going to plug in my camera and my access point. So I'm going to plug it into, I can plug it in any port I want, right? All ports are equal. So I'm going to plug it into port 2 and port 4. Okay, so port 2 and port 4 should light up. Okay, so I'm just going to hit the, oh, this thing is, okay, I'm going to hit the refresh button over here on the far right, and we should see, yeah, so it refreshed everything, and now you can see that ports 2 and ports 4, there's something going on. I'm going to, so let's look at a normal port. So I'm going to, if you hover over a port, you can see all kinds of interesting information, or you can click on that port. I'm going to click on that port and I'm going to show you a couple things. So the description of what's connected, it's empty. That's because nothing's connected. This is the port label that I told you about. You can enter this label manually if you want, or PBA can do it for you automatically. All ports are a member of VLAN 1 by default. The port priority, the PoE power priority is low by default. The QoS trust is set to untrusted by default, and then the user priority is set to 0 by default. So for the rest of the demo, I'm not doing any configuration. I'm just monitoring things. I'm just showing you things. I'm not going to do any configuration at all. But with the PBA policies, I'll show you how configuration is automated. So this is port 1 where I have nothing connected, okay? So now let's go back to the switch dashboard. We are in the port mode. So now let's hover over one of these active ports. So let's see, in port 4, I plugged something in, but let's pretend I can't remember what I plugged in. But notice here that you know, I didn't do any configuration, but this description was automatically entered. And we enter the description, we use the name of the PBA policy, so camera policy. So we know that in port 4, right here, we know that we plugged in a camera. Oh, and look at this. The VLANs that are associated with that policy were automatically, well, first they were created on the switch, and now this port is automatically a member of those VLANs. The PoE power priority, which is normally low, is set to critical. The QoS trust is set to .1p, and the user priority bits are set to 2. So all that configuration, that's a lot of configuration. We're talking about 20 or 30 COI commands that you did not have to enter. That was done all automatically. Let's see, what else can I say? So anyway, so that's port 4. Let's look at the same example for port 1. So let's go back to the switch dashboard. Now let's click on port 2. Okay, we're in port mode for port 2. So here's port 2, and again, the description was updated automatically. Now, so for this one, port 2, it's the pilot policy. So this is a Wi-Fi access point. The VLANs were automatically configured on the switch, and that port was automatically made a member of it. The PoE power priority was automatically set to high. And again, these values were automatically configured as well. So the user priority bits, the 802.1b bits, are automatically set to 3. So everything is auto-configured. All right, let's go back to the switch dashboard. So I've added one switch to this new stack I have, and I currently have devices plugged into port 2 and port 4. But I talked to you about auto cleanup. So I'm going to unplug both of those devices. Okay, I just unplugged them both, and I'm going to plug them back into port 1, port 3, which is now empty. Okay, I just plugged them into port 1 and port 3. So let's talk about 3 and 4. I unplugged them from 3 and 4. I have to refresh my screen. So at the upper right-hand corner is the refresh button. Oh. So I was having a network issues today. I think I just lost my network. It's not refreshing. So I'll show it to you when it comes back, but what you're going to see is that port 2 and port 4, all that configuration information will be, all that port configuration that was auto-configured will be automatically cleaned up. So when my network does come back, or when it goes back online, I will be able to show you that those have been automatically cleared up. So while we're waiting for that, let's go and onboard our second switch. So for the second switch, we're not adding it to an empty stack, we're adding it to an existing stack. So as you add your second switch, your third switch, your fourth switch, you're just simply assigning those during the claiming process. You're assigning them to an existing stack, and you're finished. That switch will automatically take on the configuration of that device. So anyway, so let's go back to the home screen. Let's go back to the onboarding devices. And this is the first one that we onboarded already. Let's claim a new switch. So I'm going to hit the claim button here. I'm going to go get my serial number. I'm going to enter the serial number in this window here, and here's my serial number. I'm going to claim the device, and it was a success. So I'm going to close that. So now it says waiting for device. While we're waiting, we're going to associate it with one of the stacks that I have. Okay, so the switch group, we're going to assign this switch. During the onboarding and registration process, it will be assigned to whatever switch group we pick. We're going to pick the demo stack again. So it will have, now this demo stack will have two switches after my network comes back up. And the model is, again, it's an EX2010P, and I'm going to save that. And it was onboarded successfully. So it's waiting for approval. So devices won't just automatically be added to your network. You have to approve it first. And for those of you that are familiar with cnMaestro, you'll be used to that. So I'm approving it. And it's now onboarded. So let's go back to my switch groups.
John, we have a question. I'm going to ask you now
Sure.
if I can. It says,
Sure.
Simon asked a question. If the serial number is entered into cnMaestro, why do you need to select the model when onboarding? Is that not able to be the serial number?
Yeah, hey, so Simon asked that question. Yeah, you get 10 points for that question. That's an excellent observation. And in our latest version, I think it's our latest version or the next version coming out, we will be able to identify the switch type automatically. So what you observed is going to happen, right? So based on that serial number, we will be able to determine the switch type, and you will not have to manually select it like I just did.
Thanks, John.
Sure. Good. Yeah, good. Very observant. Good question. Okay, so I'm back to over here on my navigation pane. I'm still in my cnMaestro account. So back here on my navigation pane, there's switch groups here. I selected that, and here's all my switch groups, the ones that I used to have before and our new one, this demo stack. So, and I added the first switch, and now I've added the second switch. So let's take a look at what we have there. So that first switch that went offline on me, so it's telling me, you have two switches in your switch group, but one is offline, and hopefully it will come back soon. It should in a few minutes. So anyway, so we have two switches, one is offline. Across the two switches, they're both 10-port switches. So we have a total of 20 ports, and 4 links are up. I'm going to unplug my camera and my access point. Anyway, so let's go to, what do I want to show you now? Let's go to the switches. So I just clicked on the switches tab at the top. Here are the two switches that I've added. The very first one that we were playing with, and that's offline. And then the second one that we just added, that is online. So let's select this guy. And now this guy, it's also a 10-port switch. Again, if I click on one of these unused ports, port 5, again, you can see that these values are not, they're not, it's an empty port, so there's no description. It's just the default values. Now, if I go ahead and plug in my camera and my access point, I'll plug them into, I don't know, ports 5 and 6. Okay, so I just plug them in ports 5 and 6. Let's do a refresh. Okay, so now port 5 and 6, you can see that they're active. I can hover over any port you want. Let's look at port, I don't know, let's look at port 6 first. I'm going to click on it. And so now we're looking at port 6. Let's wait for the screen to refresh. Yeah, my home network is having issues. Okay, it's a little slow. Sorry, guys. So anyway, so here's port 6 that we're looking at. Here's the description field. So look, the description field is still empty. That means that the PBA policy is still being activated. So these PBA policies that are based on, let's say they're based on the LLDP packet. So LLDP, based on the protocol, they're sent by default once every 30 seconds. And when I plugged in the device, you also have to wait for the device to power up. So the device powers up, and then once the software gets initiated, then it starts sending LLDP. So it could be a good minute or two before our PBA engine detects that device and applies the policy to it. But anyway, let's go back into a refresh and see if it's all the way there yet.
John, another quick question. This time from John in Melbourne. The question is, are both of the switches plugged into something else to get their DHCP addresses, etc., that we are not seeing?
Okay, correct. Let me back up a second. So on this switch and on the other switch I was talking about, I have the uplink of the switch. I'm using port 8 for my uplink. So this port 8 is connected to, here, let me just click on port 8, okay? So this description that is auto-populated as a result of LLDP, another feature that we have, it tells me that it's connected to another switch in my house called the distribution switch. And the distribution switch is plugged into my home router, and that's where the DHCP is coming from. So this switch is connected to the network through port 8, and which is where my home router is, and then it's off to my ISP, my internet service provider. And so anyway, that's where I get my my IP address through DHCP.
Thanks, John.
Sure, you're welcome. Okay, so that's port 8. I'm going to go back to the switch dashboard, and let's select port 6 again, and let me show you what has been. Now, remember, I'm not configuring anything. I'm just navigating around from screen to screen and showing you guys different values, but I haven't done any configuration since the very beginning when I created the PBA policies. But anyway, here we are looking at port 6. The description for that port is automatically populated. The VLANs were automatically created on the switch, and the port membership for this port, for port 6, port 6 is now automatically a member of those VLANs. The PUE port priority is automatically set to critical. And then these two items, the QoS trust and user priority bits, were automatically configured as well. So again, I did not configure that. I just manually, I just created the PBA policies up front, and PBA is automatically configuring those ports. For this port 6, I'm going to unplug the port now. And let's get myself out of this mode, go back to the switch dashboard, and do a refresh. Or I guess I didn't need to. But anyway, you can see that port 6 is now down, it's red. Let's look at the configuration of port 6, right? Well, a second ago when we looked at it, it had a description. Also, it had VLAN 600 and through 602 there, and now it's back to the default of 1. The PUE priority is back to low. So all that configuration was automatically cleaned up. QoS trust, user priority bits, automatically set back to the default value. So anyway, so let's go back to the switch dashboard. So I unplugged I unplugged it from port 6, and I'm going to plug it back in to port 1. Now, this device is powered up via PoE, so we're going to have to wait 30 seconds or a minute or so. But let me do a refresh. Yeah, so I plugged it back into port 1. I'm hovering over it, and you can see that the PBA policy has not taken effect yet, but it will. Give us 30 seconds or a minute, and it will take effect. The software has to initialize. It has to start broadcasting traffic. I think for this camera rule, maybe you guys remember, I think I'm using a Mac OUI. So as soon as we see a packet from that device that matches this Mac OUI, we'll apply the PBA policy. So I'll do a refresh. It should be there by now. Let's look at port 1. Yeah, it's all set. So I'm going to click on port 1. Here we are looking at port 1, and yep, so we moved it from port 6 to port 1, and you can see all the configuration has happened automatically on port 1. And on port 6, which I showed you a second ago, all the configuration was automatically cleaned up. That's a lot of configuration. So applying the configuration is probably 20 CLI commands. They're not difficult CLI commands, but entering 20 CLI commands, it's error prone. You can fat finger, make all kinds of mistakes. We have not entered a single CLI command. We have not entered a single configuration on cnMaestro. So all of this is automated. And I'm going to unplug port 5 and port 1, and let's see what happens here. Okay, so now I'm going to do a refresh. So now this switch is still on my network. Port 8 is still active, but the devices are all unplugged. And port 5, again, port 5 was auto cleaned up. And, automatically applying configuration is kind of cool, but auto cleanup is also cool and maybe even more important. So the VLANs were also removed from that port. So it's not open to any malicious devices, that type of thing.
John,
Okay.
I have another question from Simon, if I may. Simon's asking, please. Without ADR, when a device is disconnected, cleanup is immediate. Once ADR is enabled, how does this impact determining a device is offline versus disconnected and therefore the port cleaned up?
Thank you, Simon. You're asking good questions. So how does ADR work? What is the mechanism within ADR? So I would say that we're complete with phase 1 of ADR. ADR today relies on link layer discovery protocol. So if the device is healthy, if it's sending LODP packets, we consider the device to be healthy. If it stops sending LODP packets, we then consider the device to be unhealthy, and we will toggle the PoE on that port. And that's only if you have ADR enabled on that port. And ADR is a feature that you can enable via PBA. What else? So I think I answered your question. Roy, did I answer that question completely?
I'm just thinking if that covers it. It's just the question was, how do you determine if it's enabled and the device is either offline or unplugged? How does it clean up or know whether to clean up the configuration?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So I answered you the mechanism that ADR uses. How does PBA respond? So PBA, depending on the rule that you set, let's say the rule is you're looking at LLDP information. So once you detect that device is there, it has to constantly detect it. If the LLDP packets disappear and go away, that's the same thing as unplugging the cable. So the PBA policy will be removed at that point, and that configuration will all be cleaned up. Now, when the device comes back online, let's say we do toggle the power, let's say that's enough to kind of wake it up. It comes back up, it starts sending its LLDP packets again. the PBA policy will then detect it and reapply the policy a second time.
Thanks, John. So same action, whether
Well,
you unplug or lose power, it's going to take away the applied PBA and only apply it when it sees that the device is back online.
yeah, no, if you physically disconnect the cable, or if that device loses power, or if that device, if the link goes down for any reason, or if the device, let's say someone logs into that device locally and turns off LODP or something like that, in those cases, we will also disable the PBA policy. And we will revert back to the default value, which could be that super secure example I gave you. It could be the default VLAN, that type of thing, guest VLAN. Okay, let me go back, and I'm gonna play with my network for a bit. Give me a little bit of patience. So, that one unit is still offline. I'm not sure what's. Oh, I just found my problem. Okay, my uplink cable on that first switch got pulled out. So anyway, it lost connectivity to the rest of my home network. So anyway, the switch is now coming back online. It will take a couple minutes. So we'll get back to that in a second. There's one more thing that I want to show you. I'm going to go to the switch ports screen, okay? So this switch ports screen gives you all the stats of and information about all the interfaces or all the ports of your switch group or your virtual stack. Now, I have one or two switches. I have two 10-port switches, so I have 20 ports. So it's not that big a deal. But let's say you had 10 switches in your network, and they were the 48-port switches. So you have 500 ports. So if you're scrolling through 500 ports, it might be hard to find what you're looking for. So I just wanted to show you a little bit about how this screen works. So it's like an Excel spreadsheet. You have the different switches here, the different ports of each switch here, and then you have various columns. Well, you can change or modify or move these columns. So there's a column chooser, this right here. So, I can select which columns I view and which columns I don't view. And then there's 4 tabs over here. We're looking at the general tab. You could look at the physical tab, the network tab, so on and so forth. And then you can filter and sort on these columns just like you can on a regular Excel spreadsheet. Or you can do a search and search for various things as well. So there's a lot of mechanisms to be able to get at the information that you want to see. So, let's say we want to filter on the operational state. We only want to look at the ports that are up. Now, I unplugged my access point, my wife, and my camera, so I only have the uplink, so I only have one port that's up. But let me filter on that. So I'm going to look at only the ports that are up. And okay, I have 2 ports that are up, one on each switch. Oh, my second switch is back up now. Okay, so let's see. So anyway, so I have 2 ports that are up. So out of let's say I had 500 ports. So out of my 500 ports, I'm looking at only the ports that are up. So you can really easily filter what you're looking at. Let's switch over to like the network tab. The network tab shows you things like PBA policy and VLANs and so on and so forth. Whoops. Let me undo the where was I? I was on the general screen. So let me get rid of this filter. So I see all my ports again. I'm going to plug my phone and my Wi-Fi access point back in. Okay. It might take a minute to register, but okay. So now if I look at my operational state, there should be 4 ports that are up. No, they're not registered yet. Maybe I have to do a refresh. I just plugged them in, so it's going to take a while. What I wanted to show you is my PBA policy stuff. but I should have plugged those in earlier. It will take about a minute for us to show you this. Oh, this is interesting. PUE capable ports, you can also do that, right? So if you want to look at all your fiber uplink ports, you could do this, for example. So, we have 2 fiber uplinks per switch. So you've narrowed it down to only 4 ports now. So there's just a lot of neat, interesting, easy ways to view the ports that you care about. Let's say you're troubleshooting something in your network. You can look at statistics over here, and you can sort these columns based on the statistics, that type of thing. The column chooser, you can also show what stats you want to look at, what stats you don't want to look at. If I go to this description, I can sort this column, or let's see if I can. Yeah, I can sort this column based on the ports that have descriptions in them, that type of thing. Okay, that kind of wraps up the demo. Roy, let's hand it back over to you, and we can go through some of the Q&A.
Thanks very much, John. We've answered most of those. I have another question from Steve over in New Zealand. Steve, thanks for joining. I have used cnMaestro for managing APs. That was some time ago. Loved it. Can the policies we have been looking at be applied to wireless devices now?
So the policies are tied to the devices that are directly attached to our switch. So if you have an access point attached to our switch, the policy is applied against the port where the access point is connected. So any traffic that flows in will be applied, right? When you set up the QoS settings or the 802.1b P bits, when you set that up, it applies to any traffic on that port. But if you want to apply a policy to a wireless device that is indirectly attached to the access point, no, we do not do that. So it's the device that is directly attached to the switch.
Thanks for that, John. So any AP, Wi-Fi AP that's plugged in to the switch, you can set up a policy for and have it applied, IP phone, etc. Alexander Slay, thanks for asking this next question. So Alex has asked, does the policy-based automation also work in XMS Cloud? And is there a plan to have this put into XMS Cloud?
Yeah, good question. It does work with XMS today. Everything that I'm demoing to you today, I could demo with XMS. One clarification is that XMS will support our enterprise switches. So that's our EX2K switches, our EX1K switches. XMS does not support our TX switches. cnMaestro supports all of our radios, PTP, PMP, and also our new TX switches. So for the TX switches, it's supported only by cnMaestro, not XMS. But XMS does support all of our EX switches, and that includes PBA. So you can use PBA with XMS.
So thanks for asking that question. Very important just to remind everyone, XMS fully supports the range of cnMatrix switches and the PBA functionality. David, who's on the call with us, can also demonstrate that for anyone who needs help. I think that brings us to the end of the questions and the end of the session. I really appreciate. Oh, we have one more question that's popped up. Okay, John, love to see that in XMS. We'll arrange to have that set up and go through the demo. So our action item.
Yeah,
again, go ahead, John.
Yeah. Sorry, Roy. I just wanted to add. I covered a lot in a short period of time. There is so much more to show off. If anyone wants to have a more detailed conversation, just get in touch with Roy, and we can set something up. No problem at all.
Thanks all for joining. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe, and thank you once again from the Cambium team. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.